I had a couple of experiences in my life where I had to learn about forgiveness, unforgiveness, and forgiveness. One of them was when Stephen, and you can show a picture about him. Stephen was the one that was killed in Vietnam. Darling 18-year-old boy was killed in Vietnam. But, you know, there was not a lot of anger with that. There was pain, there was loss, but there wasn't a lot of anger because 59,000 boys were killed, and the whole world was in an upset over the things that happened in Vietnam. But then 5 years later, our 23-year-old Tim was on his way home from a trip to Alaska. And he was a darling boy, and he had been up in Alaska on a vacation. And he called me and said he would be home in 5 days. He said, "Mom, I can't wait to get home. I got to tell you what the Lord's done in my life." And I said, "Well, tell me about it." He said, No, I'll be home in 5 days. And I prayed with him on the phone. I remember praying with him on the phone for a safe trip. We used to pray for journeying mercies, whatever that is, I don't know, but my dad said you should always pray for journeying mercies, so I prayed for journeying mercy. And then after our telephone call, a few hours later, I got a call from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And they said that his little Volkswagen was hit by some drunk boys in a truck. And he and his friend were ushered immediately into the presence of God. Well, the confusion about the call was that both boys were named Johnson. They were good friends, but they were just both named Johnsons, and they were the same height, the same size, the same coloring. And because everything was destroyed in the fire or in the crash, the police that called me thought they were brothers. Now that was a little confusing to say that your two sons, your brothers were killed, so we had to get that all straightened out. So it was a very confusing time for me the first few hours. We had a beautiful service for him, and his testimony, wonderful things about his testimony came out in the service. But I realized I had something wrong with me. I mean, I knew in God's economy this was going to be used, but I didn't understand it. And I had this awful feeling of unforgiveness and anger. And by nature, I don't have an angry disposition. And so I didn't know what all this big mountain of heaviness that I had. And after about a month or so, I said, well, maybe if we went up to Whitehorse, Yukon, and I tried to find out what the details were and straighten out some of that and maybe talk to the people or find the parents of the boy that killed our son. So we went up there to Whitehorse, Yukon, a little town in the middle of nothing up in the Yukon, and we did locate the parents of this boy. Darling, lovely Christian people, their only son. And we went with them to church on Sunday, little Baptist church up there. And the pastor asked me if I would share about my son's story. Well, here I'm telling about my son's story, and they sit there, and their son is the one that killed my boy. So it's an awkward situation. And the day before we were going to leave, the parents said, our son is in jail getting ready for an arraignment for a sentence in prison, but he would like to talk to you. Oh, I came up there for this, but when you get right down to where the rubber meets the road, I don't know if I could sit and talk to this boy, man, whatever it was. But I knew that I had to do that to relieve myself of this awful load that I had. So I went over to the prison where he was, and there he sat behind bars, darling 15, almost 16-year-old boy with his head in his hands. He had been so drunk that for 2 days he didn't even know he had killed 2 boys. He's the only son of these parents. And when I looked at him and I saw what he had done to his life, to my life, to the other boy's life, I sat there, and he reached his hand out through the bars to me. And as I grabbed his hand through those bars, all that heaviness left, because God met me in my hour of need, and all it evaporated, that awful unforgiveness. No words were said between us, but volumes were said, because God just revealed to me that he loved me, and in his economy, somehow he was going to use this to work. And so I had to learn that lesson of unforgiveness, because I couldn't have lived any longer. I couldn't have ministered to people when I had that big unforgiveness in my own heart. And maybe some of you are going through areas, because when I shared this before, wherever I was, I don't know, but I was somewhere lately. I know where I was in Dallas. And it's important that I know where I was. I don't care if you know. And several people came up to me, and one lady said that her husband had ran a tractor over their child and had killed a 2-year-old child, and that she couldn't forgive him. And there's several stories of unforgiveness. So I knew that for me to help other parents and to be able to minister to them, I had to get that out of my life.